Welcome to the Mystic Tie, podcast for Freemasons. You can find us online at mystictie.com. Support us on Patreon at patreon.com/mystictie. Email me feedback, guest suggestions, and any other questions at troy@mystictie.com. Brother Paul Richard Calderwood is a specialist in this period of history, having been awarded the degree of Doctor of Philosophy by Goldsmiths University of London for his thesis on the history of Freemasonry in the 20th century. He's been very active in the craft since his initiation in 1974, including Quater Coronati Lodge 2076, and was appointed Prestonian Lecturer in 2013. Please welcome Brother Paul Calderwood. Paul Calderwood, thanks for joining me today on the Mystic Tie podcast. You were brought to my attention from our friends at Lewis Masonic, Martin Fox and his team over there, Nick. They suggested that we should talk, and I see that you've had a book released recently. Could you tell me about the book and your interest in that material?
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me, firstly.
Oh, yeah.
The book's called Discovering Secrets of the Unlawful Societies Act. And part of that is on the screen at the moment, as you probably can see in my slides. And I'll explain why Welsh Freemasonry appears there as well in a second. What I want to talk about is a very rewarding source of Masonic information that's been largely unexplored and covers a period of more than 170 years. It provides authoritative and detailed accounts of the kind of men who belonged to Freemasonry and the lodges that they supported in both England and Wales. And it comes in the form of official documents, which were required by national government and sent to the Court of Quarter Sessions every year, starting in 1799 and continuing until the Act was repealed in 1967, although in fact some lodge secretaries continued to submit annual returns for 5 years after the law had ceased to, after it had been revoked. As many of your listeners will know, under the terms of the Unlawful Societies Act of 1799, Masonic lodge secretaries were ordered to send to the Clerk of the Peace in their locality a full list of lodge members with additional details every year in the month of March. And this evening, because of time constraints, I don't propose to talk much about how and why the law came into existence, but perhaps you'll tell me later on that you'd like to know more about that. But instead, I intend to focus on the consequences of that law being enacted. The background to the Act is covered in lots of other places, including a longer version of this paper, and indeed in the book that is the end result of all this. So let me just show you what there we go. What an annual return looked like back in 1809. The one on the left is an annual return that was made by a lodge that was under the jurisdiction of the Premier Grand Lodge in 1809. And you can see there's a preamble, and then there's a list of members with their addresses and their occupations. And it's also signed by the master and the secretary, and it's sworn in front of a magistrate as an accurate legal document. The one on the right is from another lodge, but one under the jurisdiction of the Ancients Grand Lodge. So many of the annual returns made by lodge secretaries, fortunately, have survived, but very few of them have been explored in any systematic manner. Indeed, most of them appear not to have been examined at all since the day they were originally presented in court in this case back in 1809. An examination of these neglected and in most cases uncatalogued and therefore unexplored documents is an important task. And it's one that's made all the more urgent because of the fragile and deteriorating nature of so many of them. And it's therefore a bit of a race against time to capture the contents of these documents before more of them are lost. The task of capturing that information, let me show you, there's two more examples of returns. The one on the left is of a lodge that was formed after the union of the ancients and the moderns, and that's the United Grand Lodge of England lodge return. The one on the right is also a UGLE document, but you can see how badly it's survived over the years. And there are many worse examples than that, which highlight the sort of deteriorating nature of so many of these documents.
Right.
The task of capturing this information and analyze it is not only important and urgent, but it's also immense, actually. And I personally couldn't possibly tackle it myself. But what I've done is to make a start on the process by examining what I called a manageable sample, namely all of the surviving documents that could be traced within that part of the United Kingdom known as Wales. And although this is a Welsh study, therefore, it still will have, I think, strong interest to those who are interested in the history, certainly of Wales, but also English social history, and perhaps much further afield, because many of its discoveries and conclusions apply to other countries. It's my hope that this paper that I've produced will stimulate the production of similar studies of English regions, and that all those various studies, when they're completed, might one day be dovetailed together to provide a complete national picture. But I've taken what I consider to be a manageable sample at the beginning. I smile a little bit as I say that, because when I began the research, I thought there were 450 documents survived in Wales. There turned out to be over 2,000.
Wow.
So it was a task that grew as I got into it, and we made lots of discoveries about new documents, obviously. These documents provide students of social history in general with a rich new source of information, and it will undoubtedly be, I think, of considerable interest to those people who are engaged in researching and writing their Masonic lodge or their family history, finding out if grandfather or their great-grandfather was a Mason, where he lived and what his occupation was at a certain moment in time. And over the past 10 years, the primary documents were traced within the various Welsh County Archive offices. They were photographed, and the information that they contained was placed onto a searchable Excel database for later analysis. And the database records the contents of more than 2,000 documents, as I said, detailing names, addresses, occupations of all the members of each Masonic lodge year by year. Now, year by year is quite important, as well as where and when they held their meetings. I say it's important year by year because what typically happened and does happen in British Freemasonry is that on the day someone joins Freemasonry, obviously their name, address, and occupation are registered and recorded in Grand Lodge records. But after that day, they're not maintained, not updated. So we don't know if they changed their address the next year, or if they changed their job, or anything about what happened to them outside the lodge in the following years. And this gives you a year-by-year opportunity to track changes in people's circumstances.
Sure.
Altogether, the database has 200,000 lines of information. So it's a big database, and because there's a lot of duplication in there, because people, as I say, there's a return every year for the same person in many cases, it actually comes down to 34,000 individuals. So again, still a quite substantial cross-section of Masons.
Wow.
So that's the database, how it came to be created, and the book that was written about what's in the database. It book and the database reflect and inform social and economic developments which have taken place within Wales over the past 2 centuries. It also records a number of case studies of individual members and lodges. And in my book, I tried to answer 3 main questions. Who were the Freemasons of Wales? What kind of people were they? Where did they meet? And how strong were their lodges at various times over the past 200 years? And those are sort of basic questions that have been asked many times, but not really answered with much authority in the past, because we didn't have these we didn't know we had these records. We didn't go and look at them. The complete database has been deposited with the National Library of Wales, where it will be available not only in the reading rooms, but also online. So hopefully later this year, people on the other side of the world can go to that website of the National Library and look up their family history or their details about lodges they're interested in without all the trouble of going to Aberystwyth, which is where the National Library is based.
Right, right.
And copies have also been placed in the Library and Museum in London of Freemasonry and a number of other Masonic libraries, so that people can go and sit in those reading rooms and look at the transcriptions and the information. How the returns were produced by lodge secretaries and how they were dealt with by the judicial system is a large and interesting subject, which is addressed in the book, but I'm not going to go into that at the moment, because that will take us away from the main theme that I want to bring out. The annual returns highlight the role played by various groups of professionals in the life of Freemasonry and of Britain, and they reflect many of the traditions of the country, as well as changes that took place in Welsh life between 1799 and 1967. The picture that emerges from that account of life of more than 34,000 men is the story of a region and its development. And it portrays the important part, for example, which farming and forestry played in society and the economy, as well as the part played by people employed in maritime activities, the influence of the aristocracy and the gentry, the rise and gradual decline of mining, especially coal mining, as well as iron and steel making industries from their birth, the arrival of the railways into Wales, the emergence of engineering, shipping, and associated trades as major employers, the growing numbers employed in government and municipal activities, the development of public utilities and healthcare, and as well as the part played by the legal profession, the police, the armed forces, and public services, and of course the church. A no less important theme is the role played by the hospitality industry, as well as the arts, entertainment, sports, and the media. The documents refer to the war service of many Freemasons and to their role in civic and business life. And an analysis of each of these employment groups describes the way in which men from various backgrounds were attracted to Freemasonry and the influence which they played in the life of Wales. Repeatedly, the returns show the availability of free time and financial means were essential for participation in Freemasonry. But lodge membership was not drawn exclusively from moneyed or wealthy individuals. And together, the annual returns document the important part that Freemasonry played in the lives of tens of thousands of men, and they show how many of those men joined the fraternity, remained members for decades, and extended their involvement by joining additional lodges to enjoy the companionship and the networking opportunities that Freemasonry provided. One of the most interesting of the themes which emerges from this analysis of the returns is the part that Masonry played in providing stability and continuity for many men as they experienced change of location and in search of income, and how many who travelled into and through Wales, for them, Freemasonry provided a haven and a social outlet during their time in the country. In addition to information about individuals, the returns also tell us a great deal about the state of the lodges. Since 1717, almost 400 Masonic lodges have been formed in Wales and Monmouthshire. I shall be changing slides. I'm talking. These are just 3 examples of some of the interesting people that are in those annual returns. Sir John Williams, the president of the National Library, and president of the University of Aberystwyth. Joseph Parry, the composer and professor who wrote Myfanwy, which maybe some of your listeners will be familiar with, famous Welsh hymn, and the chairman of the Court of Sessions, and that's an interesting job. We'll come back to talk about that. So as I said, those are my 3 key questions. That's where I've deposited the database. And I've told you about how the database reflects the story of a nation with all those different employment categories. And each of those employment categories has a chapter in the book. So if your particular interest is looking at people who worked in engineering or in healthcare, you can go to that section and read what is contained for 170 years in the annual returns about people who were doctors, dentists, nurses, or whatever, if it's healthcare, or people who worked in the railway industry at various levels, and analyzes what's the level of seniority they had within their industry. One of the things that comes out of the study is that in the very early days, back in the early 1800s, lodges were quite small, of course. And typically, a lodge in well, I lost my place in my notes. Sorry for a moment. Right. Okay. Let me just go look a bit. I've lost my place, so I'll just go back to where I want to be.
Sorry.
For many of the lodges that were making these returns, the 18th century, the 1700s, was an especially hard time. And of the 24 that were formed in Wales during the 1700s, only 7 were still in existence in 1799 when the Act was passed. And 6 of those 7 survivors ceased to meet within 12 years of the law being enacted. It's interesting to consider whether the Act itself accelerated their closure, and that possibility or suspicion is strengthened when you consider that the total number of Welsh lodges lost during the following 157 years was only 15. Right. So it looks very much as though the Act actually had quite a negative effect upon lodges. And although it wasn't intended that the Act should affect Masonic lodges adversely, it nonetheless appears to have had that effect. Their demise may also have been influenced by publication of several hostile publications about Freemasonry in the late 1790s, which I think many of your listeners will be very familiar with. Barruel's memoir Pour servir à l'histoire and Robinson's Proofs of Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments of Europe. Both those books had an enormous influence in the 1790s and beyond.
And still are having.
And still, they've not gone away.
The last episode, just FYI, was or the episode before last, I interviewed Joseph Wages talking about the Secret School of Wisdom, and wherein he publishes the original Weishaupt and Kniga Illuminati papers.
Hmm.
And that was the first time that anybody really had published any of the actual rituals of what the Illuminati were up to.
Right.
So
It's
from Barrowell and Robinson, 200 years some odd, we're still talking about it, and it's still politically influential, especially when you consider how much conspiracism and how effective that's been with the paranoid style in American politics.
absolutely
That's interesting that there's a cross section there. Anyway, I don't want to slow your roll. I want you to
okay. I'll
go
keep
back to
going.
your notes and keep an eye on your slides,
Okay.
and we'll go back and talk about this later. But it's a
Okay.
fascinating intersect.
All right. Now, one of the things that the returns also tell us is the size of lodges, of course.
Right.
That's an interesting slide, and there's a lot of information on that. But you can see the relative sizes of different employment groups that
Right.
come out of these annual returns. It's really, really interesting. I'll say a bit more about that later on. I was talking about the fact that there were only 7 out of 24 survived the first century, and how things changed. There we go. That's the one I want. Now, lodge sizes. The size of a lodge in 1808, as you can see, was only 18 members, which it must have been a very cozy gathering, because obviously not all 18 would turn up. And it started to grow, and it grew very fast, actually, 30
Now,
years later. Yeah.
I don't imagine that. When did they start having their own buildings to meet in? Like,
Okay.
wouldn't the size of the pub meeting rooms or the
Yeah.
church basements,
Small.
right?
Uh,
Wouldn't that affect how many guys could join? Because if you can't get a seat, who wants to go stand for an hour at a lodge meeting?
You're absolutely right. And I'll come on and talk about buildings in a moment. But you're right. In the 1840s, the oldest purpose-built Masonic Hall in Wales was opened in 1848. So
Yeah.
by then, they're looking at 55 members.
Yeah.
And obviously, as you say, the pub wasn't big enough. Uh, so, but let me come back to buildings, because I really do. That's a really important subject, and I want to
Sure.
treat that separately. Let's just follow the way in which lodge numbers, the average size of a lodge, changed over time. And you'll see quite a dramatic growth in that period.
Yeah.
But some lodges even grew to have, well, over 200, and in one case, over 300 members, which in Britain is considered absolutely remarkable. I know in the United States, they still have lodges with 900 members, but for Britain, the 200 or 300 was extraordinary.
Yeah, and I think the number of big lodges is kind of overblown. There are big lodges. Each jurisdiction has their own group of flagship lodges everybody wants to affiliate, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're initiating 20 guys at a time. It's
No,
still
no.
all the work of Freemasonry is still at the village lodge size, I think, in North America. And now it's almost universally, I would say, less than 100 guys. Probably less than 50.
Isn't it? Yeah. That's the pattern in Britain as well. You know, in fact, I'd say even below 50 nowadays. But
Now, I think
you know,
Freemasonry works better. I think Freemasonry works better when you're all buds. Then
well,
you're all friends, right?
one of the things this statistics tells you is that we're going back to our roots. We're
Yeah.
going back to small lodges where people knew each other, and
Everything
they
goes
got
new
on.
again.
There was more of a harmony, perhaps.
Yeah. 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 And that's there's a reason that human society tends to organize into these smaller units, right? These small communities. There's a reason. It's we as people are better at that. It's hard to know a few hundred people, really
Well, it
know
is.
them, right?
I mean,
Really know them.
absolutely. The poor old lodge secretary had to fill out a return with all those names, addresses, and occupations
By hand.
by hand every year.
Yeah.
What a nice job.
I wonder when we started paying our secretaries to do that. because we do now,
Well,
but for the
do you?
longest time, I would imagine this was a voluntary job, like a labor of
Oh,
love.
it still is. Well, we don't pay our secretaries at all. These guys did it for love, and
Oh,
it
no
must
doubt.
have taken a lot of love to do that every year. Let
Well,
me
and
say something
paper was
about.
expensive too. Like the paper was extremely dear until the 20th century, right?
Yes, indeed. Let me. Oh, there's a sample of the kind of people, and the occupations that are recorded in these returns. It's a really wonderful, granular detail. Right, let me come back to that in a moment. Let me just say something about the social composition of lodges, the information that we get out of the returns about that. The clear pattern appears in sharp focus, especially in the early documents, shows that the organization embraced men from a wide range of social backgrounds, but it was dominated by men of wealth and leaders of the local community. The squire, the vicar, the leading members of men of the town. But they were supplemented by a few middle-ranking men with clerical ability, to what you were saying just now, who provided essential administrative skills required to be a good secretary, good treasurer, or a director of ceremonies. Plus, several men of lower social status who undertook other tasks such as tiler, steward, and organist. The membership age profile is another area of much speculation that has been, and what is clear from these returns is that it was an organization composed principally of men past middle age, principally, not inclusively, but principally, throughout 170 years. A certain amount of wealth has always been a necessity for membership because of the costs involved. And that inevitably skewed the age profile towards older men. Freemasonry throughout its history seems to have been a hobby that had an especially strong attraction for men as they approached or entered retirement. The word retired as an occupation, for example, occurs in the annual returns in well over 11,000 of the lines of information. Now, you asked me about meeting places. An overview of the kind of venues that we use for meetings of Masonic lodges is certainly one of the other aspects that emerges from the annual returns. These documents reveal that the most common meeting place for lodges in Wales, especially in the early years, was on after the early years rather, was on Masonic premises. The total number of alternative venues which they listed was just 44. Half of them were hotels, which includes pubs and taverns and inns and things that go by those sort of terms. A quarter were civic halls, civic buildings, town hall, civic chambers, and the last quarter was principally of churches and miscellaneous venues. They included sort of, I mentioned the town hall, but also the Calvary Chapel in Bargoed and the Baptist Chapel School in Wrexham. An assortment
Did
of
you have
other.
did you have a
Yeah,
slide? I thought I saw a slide by. Maybe you should.
you're so right. Thank you for keeping my mind on the slides as well. There you
Well,
go.
you're doing all the heavy lifting. I'm just watching.
So there you are. That's what I've just said, more or less.
Yeah,
But
fascinating.
it shows that in the early years, all those other places were dominant. And then gradually, because of accommodation reasons, because of privacy reasons, for various factors, there was a transition to having Masonic premises. And of course, in the early days, Masons didn't have enough money probably to put up a building straight away. It was something they had to save for over a number of years and gradually had the resources to put up their own building and be more private, really.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's that one I'll come back to in a second.
Do you think that I'm going to derail you again?
Yeah, go
Was
on.
it did we feel the need for secrecy after, do you think after Barwell and Robeson, do you think we were
Yes,
worried that we became worried about Cowan's, not
we
not
did.
people eavesdropping, because of course all of our secrets were published 10 minutes after we decided what they were, but more about like people who maybe meant us harm, or
Yeah,
religious fanatics that thought we were up to something no good in there. Like, is that why? Because the Tyler used to be like a hired guard, right? When we met in a pub,
yeah,
be an
absolutely.
off duty cop or
Yeah,
somebody else that be trusted to keep everybody. Maybe just the burly guy who kept the peace at the pub. Maybe he's the guy that sits in a chair outside the door and says, you got to know somebody to get in this room. Did the need for secrecy drive us to build our own buildings? Maybe you've got no evidence. Maybe that's just your opinion. I wonder how
well,
that.
no, it's a really valid point. The attitude of United Grand Lodge of England, in fact, the English and Welsh, the English Grand Lodges, their attitude towards privacy and secrecy has gone in waves. It's gone up and down at different periods. At certain periods, they were very trying to attract as much publicity as they could.
Sure.
Certainly, um, at the time that this piece of legislation came into force, they definitely went into retreat. They didn't want to be attracting too much notice. Um, and I'll have to explain why the law came into existence now. Uh, I wrote another book, several other books, but one in particular called Freemasonry in the Press. And it deals with the Masonic changing attitudes of the
Mm.
Grand Lodges towards publicity. And so there were a lot of detail in there. And you find it goes in waves. There's periods where they're very keen to attract publicity. So in the from 1717 up until the middle of the early 1730s, they were actually having public processions, as you know, through the streets of London and other places, courting publicity, attracting new members, they thought. And then we had these exposures, people betraying Masonic secrets and trying to make fraudulent claims on Masonic charity. And Grand Lodge realized that it needed to change a lot of things, including its attitude towards publicity, and decided to go back into into the shades. But then later in the century, we have this piece of legislation that was enacted in the 1790s, at a time when Britain was being threatened both by insurrection within Britain and by invasion by the French during the Napoleonic Wars. And there was a great deal of disturbance. And the people that were opposed to the government system that Britain had in the 1790s formed themselves into secret societies. They administered an oath of secrecy upon new members because they didn't want to be infiltrated by government agents and identified and arrested and all the rest of it. And so hence, the government brought in lots of repressive legislation in the 1790s during this period of conspiracy and threat of invasion. One of the pieces of legislation was the Unlawful Societies Act, which made it illegal to belong to any society that imposed an oath of secrecy upon its members. So for Freemasonry, that, of course, was a disaster, would have been a disaster. The Freemasons managed to get an interview with the Prime Minister, and they negotiated an exemption from the legislation. So in 1799, when the Act came into force, all those other targeted organisations, the United Irishmen, the United Scotsmen, the United Britons, the London Corresponding Society, all became outlawed and were persecuted. not the Freemasons. They were the only organization that gained an exemption. And the condition of them getting an exemption was that they would make a return every year to the courts, listing their members, where they lived, and what they did for a living. And that's where we are now the beneficiaries of that onerous task that lodge secretaries had imposed upon them as their permission to exist, basically.
Right.
So that was a period when Freemasonry and Robeson's book and Barruel's book were published, and there was every instinct in the Masonic Grand Lodges to withdraw from the public gaze, to not attract publicity. But
Right.
later, in the middle of the following, in the 1800s, there was a change. And when the Prince of Wales, who later became King Edward VII, became the Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England in 1874, and of all the other Masonic orders in Britain, then publicity became something highly desirable again, because they could say, look, here is the future, he's the heir to the throne, he's the Grand Master, we're a safe, trustworthy organization, and anyone who wants to be highly regarded in society should think about joining Freemasonry. And so
Right. Here we are as establishment.
back in the limelight.
How could we be anti-establishment when the king is in charge?
That is exactly it. That actually was the clinching argument back in 1799 as to why Freemasons should be exempted from the law, because all the king's 6 of the king's sons were leading Freemasons. Various members of parliament, government ministers, aristocrats, all the people that would lose their power and authority if there was a revolution were members of the upper ranks of Freemasonry. So they couldn't possibly be a revolutionary organization, could they?
Right.
Well, that's the argument anyway. So,
but at
yeah.
the same time, it's at the same time in France and in North America, there's the flip side is also true, right? It's Freemasonry is a stabilizing force, not necessarily pro-establishment. Let's just
no stabilizing,
stabilizing, more pro-stability than pro-establishment. Anyway, one could argue.
So
certainly with all. Let's get back to your slides.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Just to finish the talk about publicity.
Sure.
After 1900, Freemasonry again started to retreat a little bit, and then a man called Alfred Robbins became the president of the Board of General Purposes in UGLE, with the endorsement of the program master, Lord Ampthill, and they rolled out a period of 20-odd years of maximum publicity for Freemasonry. They were sending press releases to the media, telling them about every lodge's achievements and actively seeking publicity. In the 1930s, when there was so much repression of Freemasonry, particularly in fascist countries in Europe, and also in communist countries, Grand Lodge decided that it was a good time to lower the profile again and not seek publicity. And that continued right the way through to the 1980s and 90s, when we bore the consequences of that retreat from the public sphere, and all sorts of fantastic accusations were laid at our doorstep. And it was decided the time had come again to start communicating with people in a much more active and open way and seek publicity to get understanding. So in answer to your question, publicity has been something that sometimes was in favor and sometimes wasn't. And it went up and down like a wave.
Yes, of course. And
I'm sorry.
We're seeing that back and forth all over the place, jurisdictionally. Yeah. And with different changes in leadership and changes in needs, and with the membership crisis and every other crisis and the re-rise of fascism, all these things.
Let me try and summarize what we've covered then. So these annual returns show us lots of things. They tell us about the growth of lodges in terms of numbers, numbers of lodges, in terms of average sizes of lodges. It illustrates the need for larger premises as time went by. It talks about the age, reveals the age profile of the membership. It highlights the fact that the leaders of society were very prominent members and dominant members of Freemasonry for a very long time. Highlights people who had very long service in Freemasonry, very long periods of membership. And it is interesting that even though they moved away from their lodges in many cases, huge distances across the world, they retained their lodge membership, and they retained it for very long periods because it was clearly something important to them. And it was important to them for several reasons, really. One of which was it gave them, particularly notices amongst the seafarers and the colonists, that it was a way of getting established quickly in a new community, in a new society. Wherever they went, Freemasonry was a link, and it's illustrated in the returns. As is the fact that so many people join more than one lodge. Their names pop up in lots of the returns, and you can see how people maintained multiple memberships and for long periods. And it reflects also the economic and social life of the country in which they lived. So you see certain occupations start to disappear from the annual returns and be replaced by a more modern equivalents. So that the saddle makers and the people that produced harnesses and so on transitioned to become makers of suitcases and sports equipment. You see people who used to be hustlers and horse farriers and the like transitioning towards being bicycle and motor car distributors. And in many other ways, you see the economic and social changes in society reflected in these annual returns, the growth of the public sector, health and local government. Of great use, I think, to people who are going to write a lot of history, family history, or anything of that kind. There you are. I've got to the beginning again. I think I've probably laboured the point in lots of ways, but I think you can see that these documents, which have not been explored, can provide substantial new information and corroborate things we understood and thought we knew, but here's the statistical living proof of it.
Now, this is great. Do you want to stop sharing and we can...
Yeah. Okay, let's stop sharing for a minute.
Unless you have other images or something you want to...
Oh, no, I was going to... there we go. We're back. Screen sharing is stopped.
Yeah. That's a fascinating overview of what's in the book. And, I read the book description. I don't have the book yet. I've ordered copies. They'll be here. I have a table at our Grand Communication in a couple of weeks. And I have piles of stuff here from Lewis Masonic. And so I'm always trying to get ahead of when stuff comes out, but they aren't always as ahead of things as I want to be. So, because I want to read it, I want to read the book before I interview the writer. So I'll have you back once I'm finished reading it. We could do a much more thorough process, and I can give you some critical feedback for what it's worth from a distant colonial to a British Freemason and see what you think. Now they stopped doing these annual returns to the court. When 1967, is that when
1967 the law was revoked?
It was considered to be too invasive.
No, you see, it ceased to
cumbersome.
It certainly was cumbersome for the lodge secretaries. It was considered to be an anachronism. Very early in the 19th century, people said, well, why are you producing all these annual returns? We don't what do we do with them?
We don't care about this.
Yeah,
Why
we've
are
got
we?
important things to do. Yeah,
Yeah.
but Parliament was too busy with other important, more pressing things to repeal it, revoke it. So it stayed on the statute book in spite of a number of attempts over the 170 years to get rid of it. They ran out of time at each attempt until 1967, when there was a government in Britain that said there's a whole lot of these old laws that really, there was a historical reason for them to exist. They're no longer relevant to today's age. They're of no use to us. Let's get rid of them. And so it was revoked along with a lot of other laws in the 1960s.
Now, I imagine there's a reason you're publishing this work now. It isn't about the historical interests. It's because everything old is new again, like we're talking about. And Freemasonry as a secret organization is being discussed politically again. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? About what's going on,
Um,
right? Do you
yeah.
have strong opinions? Bear in mind,
Uh,
we could edit this if you brush up against something
okay.
you find embarrassing or you're
Yeah.
worried about what you say. Just speak freely.
Well, the timing of it is not significant. It
Oh,
is
it would
sim-
just so happens that you're
it is just that I've been working on this for 10 years. It took me a
geez.
long time to get through. And really, at various stages in the course of that study, I thought to myself, I'm not going to be alive to see this finished, because it was such an immense task. The 200,000 lines to be transcribed.
No
Uh,
doubt.
and it was thanks, in a sense, to the COVID epidemic, when we were locked down in Britain for long periods, that I suddenly found I had a lot of spare time on my hands, and I was able to do a lot of catching up and make real progress with this study. But it's been going on for 10 years, and I finally managed to get to the point where I've copied out the contents of all the um, annual returns. I've managed to get them placed with some libraries, including an online facility. And I got the time to write an analysis, which is the book, about what they contain. And having got there, I wasn't going to hang around for any
Yeah,
long.
no, that's fair.
So
That's
it
fair.
was just to do with my life, not the world around me.
S- do you have anything to say about what's going on currently? That there's a further discussion in the public milieu that hey, these guys need to be known. Like their information needs to be public as a matter of public record, especially people in law enforcement or the judiciary or any of that. Do
Mm.
you have strong opinions about that?
Not with what I would call strong opinions, but I do have opinions, and I think that I my honest opinion is that this will never go away. That we will always find ourselves bumping into these conspiracy theory people, because they refuse to listen or read the facts.
Yeah, they don't
And
care about facts. Don't cloud
no,
you facts.
it's
Yeah.
not as exciting. It's not as interesting. It's not as much
No,
fun.
that
And
gets in the way
so
of a good story.
they'll just carry on their own sweet way.
Yeah.
And
Well,
um,
you may not know this, but we had a conspiracy theorist and somebody mentally ill burn to the ground the lodge I was raised in, and then one building was gutted, another building was just damaged, and we're still dealing with the repercussions of that. There was a Grand Lodge emergent meeting last night to resolve an issue of a lodge charter because of some issues around the particular building that was burnt down, and the
yeah,
brethren involved it. And that's the first time, well, the fourth time since we were formed in 1860 something, Grand Lodge of British Columbia and Yukon. So there's still echoes of this, like one person, one lone crazy. But when it happened, we were concerned because, of course, this was during COVID, and there was all sorts of new and scary rhetoric that was based on old scary rhetoric, and there was new methods to promulgate it. Social media.
mm,
Again, there's no gatekeeper on social media, right? So the people who
uh,
want to promulgate this stuff and mean us harm, it's just open season. In fact, it when you look at what's going on globally, there's a profit motive due to the
Yes.
change in technology, right, to promulgate these ideas.
Yeah.
And so one can combat it only so much, but it's up to each and every one of us when we encounter it to be like, um, and just call it out. You're crazy. But part of the problem with that is it further isolates people that are already isolating themselves, and that just feeds further into it. So I'm kind of mystified as to what we do now.
Yeah.
And one probably my most frequent guest, Brother Wes Regan, who was involved in public health during the pandemic and has studied conspiracies at a university level. He's getting he's publishing a doctoral thesis, I believe, in this area of study with conspiracism and conspirituality and how it's affecting public health.
Yeah.
But because we've had repercussions here, all Freemasons everywhere, but some Freemasons in this jurisdiction in particular are watching what's going on in Britain because around the world, at some point, the Freemasons had so many members that we were noticeable, and now we're a rounding error, right, in the public sphere, but we still have an outsized place in the political discourse,
Mm.
especially now. And it's talking about it and seeing how different jurisdictions and different governments are dealing with it. It's a particular interest, and it's going to be one of those may you live in interesting times sorts of things where we need to
Yeah.
learn the lessons of history about how to survive, and what we're going to do, you know.
Well, I think my motives for doing this study and writing this book are really for our own benefit, principally, so that we can understand and know more as Masons about the kind of membership we had and what happened to our lodges. The secondary part of this is to inform the wider public, because I think it's important to inform people. Misunderstanding usually flourishes when there is a lack of information, when imaginations get fired up and run away.
Sure.
So it's important to provide reliable, solid information and good communication. And
Yeah, no, I agree. And yeah, sorry, I interrupted you there.
but
Yeah,
I am a believer in this greater openness that has been ushered in the last 30 years. I think it's for our own good. It hasn't swept away the conspiracists. They're still there, and they will always be there, in my view, with varying strengths. But I think the more we can inform the general public, the more likelihood is that more people will make a balanced assessment of it and see the conspiracies for what they are, really.
sure. Uh, is there further interest in taking this further, in building a bigger project or raising funding to get more items scanned, or to engage with, say, a software engineer to transcribe this stuff using newer tools? Has
I
there been
hope
any
so.
do that?
I hope so. And that's one of the aims that I have in publicizing this book and trying to encourage other people to take an interest in this hidden treasure, which I've only exposed a small part of it.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that other groups of Masons, provinces, whoever, especially as you say, now that technology is enabling so much, especially artificial intelligence, which, when I started this 10 years ago, it was, it was in a different technological age.
Course.
That
Of
it
course.
was much more of a labor-intensive human production. I hope that they will, and that's my wish, really.
I was turned on to an academic book some time ago by Brother Wes, and then Joseph Way just brought it up as part of his references, and I read it and I can't remember what it's called. Something about the tower. Anyway, I'll put it in the show notes. And this academic argues that network effects between people who knew each other were much more influential historically than people really realize. And we had no way to study that until recently, when tools were developed to compare these lists of people who were members of this or that. And
Yeah.
apparently, it's commonplace on the continent. There's a number of university systems where they feed these big databases together, and they come up with these connections that were largely unknown before. And I would be interested to see what would come of your of all of this, because you've already pointed it out. Just looking at it with a human eye on paper, and then in a on a spreadsheet, what would a machine make of that, making connections with people much faster?
Yeah.
Um, I think that would be fascinating. Again, Joseph Wages, in his recent book about Etienne Morin, talks about how the network was more influential than anything he did. It was the network he was involved in that made such a huge difference to the craft, and even the establishment of the Royal Arch, or Scottish Rite. And it's this book, Etienne Morin. I don't know if you've seen it. Anyway, he goes on at some length, and I think you'll see in the next few years quite a bit more uncovered with this, because it's a new area of study and people are talking about it more. I'm not sure if you're familiar with any of this,
No,
but
I'm not. I'm not really, but it sounds really interesting.
yeah,
Um,
the historical study of networks of people is like a huge and growing area of study right now. Right now. Anyway, um,
yeah.
thanks for doing that for us. I did have some other questions for you, and I got to switch gears. I'm going to ask those questions. You are a Freemason?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Did
Yes.
how did you get involved in the craft? Because right, it's not like people just inherit being in the craft, right? We gotta
No.
You gotta join, and as you've pointed out, people get passionate about it and they stick around. Why did you join, and why did you stick?
Okay, that's an interesting question.
And feel
I was
free to get
actually
as personal as you want.
okay. I was raised as a Roman Catholic, and the Roman Catholics' religion's attitude towards Freemasonry historically has been pretty negative, really. Uh,
Indeed.
and
Ask Farewell, he would tell you.
and So when I was 21, my father invited me to become a Freemason because he was a Freemason, see, and I refused because I'd been fed an awful lot of information from the church about the strange things that Masons do. Um, and uh, 6 years later, I realized that actually I made a mistake. And I went to my father and I said, actually, I would like to become a Mason because, I've looked at what's been said against it and I looked at what's been said in its favor. And on balance, I think it's something I'd like to be involved in. And so luckily, he was just about to become the master of his lodge. And so I was his candidate in his year. And it's a kind of an inheritance, but it was an inheritance with a bit of thought on my part before I took plunge. Yeah.
And which lodge did you join? Are they still around?
Joined a London lodge called Spencer Park. It was one of those many lodges that were formed after the Second World War when there was a huge upsurge in consecrating new lodges, people coming out of the armed forces looking for
Yeah.
comradeship that they'd enjoyed in the military to continue in civilian life. And it 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 was my mother lodge. Interesting, by the way, one of the things I didn't mention, and Spencer Park was a good example of it. There were a lot of shopkeepers in Spencer Park Lodge, and the statistics from these annual returns highlight the fact, I don't know why, but shopkeepers and merchants were the biggest social group in Freemasonry over 170 years, right across the whole of Wales, probably all across England, probably across the world. But for some reason, shopkeepers were really attracted to Freemasonry. And that's one of the intriguing things that comes out of this.
I grew up in retail. My family wasn't involved in the craft, but I joined it. And
Yeah.
it's kind of like a middle class. I guess it's a middle class thing to a little extra time and a little extra money, and to want to develop yourself.
Yeah,
And that's a new experience in human history, right? The idea that there's so many middle class, and it I get the perception in the UK that the society is a bit more class stratified than it is here in North America. But but I would imagine with shopkeepers, or small manufacturers, or guys that own some sort of shop that makes something or resells something,
mm,
that would be the biggest group of people during the
there's
Industrial Revolution.
that's right. I mean, there are lots of factors at work here. One
Yeah.
is networking, of course,
Yes.
um, and shopkeepers and merchants. They like to find customers.
Sure.
Uh, and widen their circle of acquaintances. They're
So
also
so
they're also
did
a
you
good
find
source. Sorry, they're also a good source of candidates because they're in contact with a lot of members of the public.
sure, sure, and then everybody knows them, right? They wanna get
Yes,
know and and being a it tends to be people that are I would say, people who open a shop want to interact with the general public.
yeah,
That's why
that's
they're
right.
doing that gig, right?
They're
If you
they're
if you have the largesse to be able to make that, and that's a very middle class thing too, to take that chance to open a shop, right?
they're
And then succeed.
communicators.
Yeah, 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 and they're good communicators, and they've got skill sets, and they got a little money.
Yeah,
I just think they're an ideal so when you joined your lodge, was that who was in there? Was mostly, like,
there are a lot of shopkeepers in there. Yeah,
local middle class people, just regular old
yeah.
folks?
We used to meet on a Monday. Now, Monday was a day when most shops were closed at that time in history. Um, so it was a good day for shopkeepers to have a lodge meeting on Mondays.
And did you meet in the afternoon, or did you meet in the evening, or how did that go?
Afternoon, mid-afternoon, usually about three
Daylight.
o'clock. Yeah,
Daylight. That's really rare here in North
yeah.
America.
Oh, and
Wow.
it went on for a long time. You didn't get home until 11 o'clock at night.
Yes.
So it was a long session. Uh,
Yes.
you'd meet at 3. You'd probably take a day for people who weren't shopkeepers and had to the premises that day. You have to take a half a day or a whole day off work to go to a lodge meeting. So you'd get there before 3 o'clock, obviously, and you'd do a degree ceremony. They'd call off, and then they'd do another degree ceremony.
Wow.
Then they'd have a break for drinks, and then they'd go for a meal. And some of the speeches after the meal went on for quite a long time.
Wow. And like a formalized festive board with speeches and everything, or would
Yes,
that
very formalized, very
yeah, love
formal
it.
listed board with
Yeah.
toasts and responses, some of which were longer than others, is what I'll say.
Yes. Yes. I've experienced that.
Um,
My lodge had an English founder, and in the early part of the 20th century, and it's not uncommon around here for lodges to have a formal festive board, but our festive board can be exceedingly formal, and we like it that way, and we
yeah,
think that it's a huge part of the lodge experience. Now we meet
yeah.
once, sometimes twice a month, most often twice a month, and do visit. How often did your mother lodge meet?
Oh,
Was it in the English fashion, like 6 times a year, or was it every month? Or
not even that frequent. It was 4 times a year.
yeah.
Yeah, there were lodges that met 6 times a year. Some met 12 times a year,
Yes, yes.
but mostly lodges were 4 a year.
And
Um,
were you meeting at Great Queen Street or somewhere else in London?
yes,
Yeah,
that's
that
Way Queen Street.
that would have made an impression. What a beautiful building.
It was, it was all part of the Masonic experience. You go to
Oh,
this
for sure.
magnificent building, you go next door for dinner in the Connaught Rooms, which is was a splendid dining venue, and it would be quite expensive, but you get, something to remember. It'd be a good day out.
That's my lodge's namesake, the Duke of Connaught.
Oh, is it? Right.
Yes, yeah. The Luther Watt-Stoney, who founded us, was a
Yeah.
big fan, and of course, he was the Governor General of Canada,
Yes,
the
indeed.
Duke himself, when we were founded. So it's
Yeah.
lots of connections. And before the building burnt down, we had some personal artifacts of the Duke himself. Um,
Right.
but of course, they were lost in the fire.
It's the favourite son of Queen Victoria. and he held the record as the longest running Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge. He was Grand Master for 39 years.
And a statesman of some renown in the post-colonial
Yes, he
period.
was.
He
Not only in Canada,
so
but
important and yet largely forgotten. But
yes, indeed.
that's how
And
English is that, to just serve and
do you
just
know,
drift into history.
there's a wonderful book about his life written by, I'll get the name in a second. It's up there somewhere. And there we are, Noble Franklin. It's called Witness of a Century, and
Oh,
it's the life of the Duke of Connaught. And it's really interesting, goes into great detail about the many facets of his life. And you know, the one thing that I miss out is his Freemasonry. There's hardly a breath of mention of Freemason, the whole of it. And yet
wow.
he held the record for the longest serving Grand Master up until his retirement. I hasten to add that the current Grand Master, the Duke of Kent, of course, has exceeded that record. But up until, then 39 years was a terrific achievement of.
Well, and at a time when the Duke of Kent is largely hands off. No disrespect, of course. He's the Grand Master of Freemasons, UGLE, but the Duke of Connaught was involved and kept hours at his office at Queen Street, and would interact. Like he was an important part of the machinations of the craft during his life, in a way that the current Grandmaster isn't nearly as involved, right? And that's for obvious reasons. It's just the nature of the change in society.
I think so. Yeah, he was very active, and he attended Grand Lodge and presided over lots of Masonic meetings.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And had a lot to say about defending Masonry.
Yeah. So you joined your lodge, you took your degree ceremonies. How did that affect you? Have you spent much time considering that?
Well, being an undergraduate was a wonderful experience. One of the best experiences of my life, really. And a very long-lasting, still has, impression. And I thoroughly enjoyed that episode in my life. When I got to the end of got my bachelor's degree, I wanted to stay on at university and do postgraduate research, but unfortunately, I had to go to work, and
We all.
Yes, so I had to give up that dream.
Damn.
So I went and worked for 50 years. And then when I reached retirement, I went back to university and I did a doctorate. So I was the oldest student registering when I registered. And I did a degree in the history of Freemasonry because it united all my interests, really. And I studied the relationship between Freemasonry and the media because I'd worked in the media all my working life. And I was intrigued as to why Freemasonry had such a poor public image in the media when I knew it to be one of the most wonderful organizations ever created, and I couldn't understand this mismatch. And so I went and studied it as a student, full-time student again.
And did you come up with any recommendations for the rest of us?
Well, the main one is this one I alluded to earlier about being as open as you can, and try and make sure people have a much better informed understanding about Masonry, because it was in the dark withdrawal periods that we suffered most.
Yes.
And, it was responsible for a lot of the darkness as well.
Yeah. No, ignorance needs to be shown the light, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. The prelude to understanding is communication.
Yeah. And that's, you and I are doing that right now across the ocean. It's fascinating how these tools have changed what we do and what we can do.
It is.
I didn't warn you I'd ask this question. So you stuck around in Freemasonry. What do you think kept you sticking? Do you still go to that same lodge, or have you retired somewhere to the countryside?
Oh, sadly, that lodge was
how English would that be?
well, that lodge was erased, sadly.
Oh,
Lack of members. The membership diminished in time, and eventually it had to surrender its warrant. So don't go to that one. I go to other lodges now. I've joined. Um, the thing that's kept me interested and in Freemasonry is the fact that there's always something new to learn. Um, there are so many, as you know, so many levels of interest in Freemasonry. I like the history of Freemasonry. I like the morality, the social aspects, the charitable work. There's always something new to learn in Freemasonry. I've been a member now for 52 years, and I'm still finding new things about Masonry, and I've studied it quite extensively. And there are still
oh,
things coming to light, and it's just an inexhaustible source of enjoyment and information.
that's so exciting to hear.
Yeah.
And you're still active in your lodge?
Oh, yes. Yes,
Do you,
I'm. I,
do you have parts and pieces that are your favorite? Like we all have
I'm
a
the master at the moment of three different lodges in three different orders. I've got quite
wow.
a lot of ritual to try and memorize and deliver. And I'm still enjoying learning new things and delivering them and playing a really active part. Yeah.
Well, congratulations, and I hope it's one of those things. I heard a woman who's talking about deconstructing religion on another podcast, and she was talking about how to find the benefits of religion without participating in a religion, it's extremely difficult, and it's
Yeah.
one of the things that men who join Freemasonry get without even thinking about it.
Yes. It's a
We
very
get
natural.
we get you're learning all the time, you're memorizing all the time, you have something to place your faith and hope into, and you're meeting people and being social, and you're getting dragged out of the house for many
Yeah.
of them, more nights a month than you would want. Your partner might look at you askance again, like it's that'll be 4 times this week. Where are you?
Yeah.
And I'm going to be district deputy grand master at District 17 here. And that's I will supervise only 6 lodges, but it, it's a big job. There's a lot to do.
Sure.
And again, my partner's prepared, right? We've been preparing for this until I get installed in a few weeks. Um, I'm going to ask you this question. I'm going to give a bit of a gap here so I can edit this because it would be, it's untoward and I didn't warn you. I always want to ask brethren off the record about their spiritual pursuits because one of the accusations, Barrowell, Robeson, and the modern anti-Masonic movement is that, oh, you guys are trying to replace the church. But how has the craft affected your spiritual life? You were a practicing Catholic, I imagine, when you joined. How has that changed for you, and how does your spiritual life look now?
Okay. Wasn't a practicing Catholic when I joined. I had been a practicing Catholic for 25 years before I joined, but by the time I joined, I was no longer. I was a lapsed Catholic. Um, but I've remained a very strict, serious Christian ever since. And I play a very active part in my local church. In fact, I'm what's called the chairman of the Ministry Area Council. So we're responsible for 21 churches across a big area of Wales, and I think it's time well spent.
Good for
It's an
you.
important activity, and my religion is as strong as it was when I first learnt my catechism as a child.
Nice.
Yeah.
And
But it's
so,
in a different way. It's
yeah, of course.
in a Roman Catholic environment. It's in an Anglican environment, and it is underpinned by Freemasonry as well.
Good for you. And you're finding it fulfilling because you're still involved.
Yeah, I am. I'm a Eucharistic assistant and a sidesman and a reader at church, and I try and go every week. And it's just an essential part of my life, really.
So those that would point at Freemasonry as an enemy of the church, and good society. Uh, what would you have to say to people like that? Not that they're going to listen, but what would you
No,
like?
they're
Isn't
completely wrong.
Freemasonry part of spiritual development? Like, doesn't it help a man develop spiritually? I think it does.
They're completely wrong in their perception, really. And Freemasonry reinforces my religious beliefs, and it gives me moments to think about morality and about relationship with the eternal, and it it is a focus for me.
Good for you.
It's not an
I,
alternative. It's not
I'm
an alternative.
yeah. I'm happy for some men that were never raised in a church, but feel drawn to it and have an issue with the with with churches or spiritual authority. I mean, Freemasonry does provide an excellent starting point, I think. But
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I'm just happy that people are interested in a spiritual pursuit at all, because it's
I am.
in a secularizing world, right? It seems people are less and less interested. I'm not interested what a man's faith is. I'm interested that a man has a relationship with deity at all.
Absolutely. I think the way to look at it is that Freemasonry and religion are partners in trying to make men in the modern world give some thought and some time to thinking about their relationship with God and about moral behavior and those kind of and standards, really.
That's an excellent comment. That's amazing, your take on that. And I'm, with your permission, I'm going to put that out there on the podcast, if you don't mind,
Mm. No, please do. Please.
because
I
some
mean,
people are cagey about that stuff,
no,
and
no.
I get why. Especially when you're talking about Freemasonry in a Freemasonic environment. But nothing you've said, I think, would tread on our landmark at all.
No, no.
Everything that you say is completely within the bounds of the square and compasses.
Yeah.
You know, maybe more the compasses than the square. So
Unfortunately, an awful lot of people lead their lives without any thoughts about God or morality or decent behavior. And Freemasonry is one of those things that makes them give some thought to that.
slow down and take a look at that. It
Mm.
holds up. I'll say this, and this is, I'm borrowing this from somebody else, but it holds a mirror up to the candidate.
Yes, it does.
Is
That's a
that
very good way of putting it.
people wanted to see you speak about this book? Are you doing any further speaking or speaking engagements for the book launch at all?
Yeah, I've got a busy year ahead of me. I've got so far 18 invitations to go and talk to installed masters lodges all over Britain, and
Amazing. I'm gonna get you an invite to speak by Zoom to a lodge. Um, but we would have to find a time that works, because of course, when we're having lodge meetings here, it's like 4 a.m. there.
yeah, okay.
Uh,
We'll think about that.
Conversely, I will be at QC next spring, I think, for the May meeting. So I
Oh,
will
great.
arrangements. I've got so many people to meet, but if you're around or you're out speaking, I will make every effort to come and see what you're doing and where you're talking, or at least meet you in person. So, is there a place where the general public could meet you to get you to sign a book? Are you going to be doing any book signings anywhere?
Yeah,
Or
all of those 18 places and
oh, okay. And
anywhere.
members of the public, they wouldn't be lodge meetings necessarily.
No, I've been doing them in Letchworth, which is a shop in Freemasons Hall in London. Any member of the public can walk in there and buy a book. And when I was in there, I was signing books for people.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, get me those dates, and I will somehow get them posted either in the show
Thank you.
notes or on the website, and make sure people know where to go get a book, because I think this is our print culture is important, and what you're talking about is so Masonic print culture in several ways. It's fascinating. Fascinating. Have a good one.
And, okay. Bye-bye. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening today. You could support the show by liking, sharing, and subscribing on your favorite podcast syndicator. Even more helpful, leave us a review. We are looking to create a directory of Freemasonic events and publications. If you are aware of something coming up, please let me know by email. In the meantime, check out the Masonic Conference's website at masonicconferences.com. Esotericism and Freemasonry Conference will be held on Saturday, September 19th. Our keynote speaker will be Lon Milo Duquette, author of The Tarot Architect. Brother Ike Baker and Brother Doug Russell will also be in attendance. Get your tickets in advance by RSVP to esotericmasonry@gmail.com. Also, check out our newly relaunched website at esotericmasonry.com. For other events, check out our calendar at mystictie.com and don't forget to sign up for our newsletter while you are there. Graphics and web hosting are by Artsabo Creative. A special thanks to Organist for our theme music. Happy to meet, sorry to part, and happy to meet again.